Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress. Only 62 days left till the World Championship match in London in November between Carlsen and Caruana. That is the 47th event in the history of the official and undisputed World Championship, and we are continuing the countdown, the build-up on Chess to Impress by looking at the first 46 events. We have arrived in 1937, where world champion, the 5th world champion Max Euwe, defended his title in a rematch against the 4th world champion Alekhine. After losing the title, Alekhine challenged Euwe to a rematch. Euwe accepted, and the match, like the first one, was held in the Netherlands. Over 30 games with at least 6 wins by the winner. That was the same in the first match. Alekhine won his title back, and after the match Euwe said Alekhine's perfect technique and combinative talent are so well known that it is unnecessary to talk about them. His conduct of the endgame was shining. Even so, I admire most how he finished the endurance games. I had to analyze them too, so I know them well. When I think of how my opponent created ingenious ideas and how he finished them in unexpected ways, I have only the greatest admiration for Alekhine's playing style. Magnanimous words from the defeated world champion. Here's a picture from the match, the challenger Alekhine on the left and world champion Euwe on the right. In this video we're going to look at game 6 of this 1937 match. Let's get into it. After 5 games Euwe was up 3 points to 2, and game 6 was played on the 16th of October 1937. Alekhine was white and Euwe was black. The challenger opened d4 and the world champion answered d5. We saw another Slav defense and knight c3. Here Alekhine writes that knight f6 is playable and e5 is playable, but Euwe chose for taking on c4. e4, and here b5 to hang on to the pawn is not good for black, according to Alekhine's analysis, and Euwe played e5, countering in the center. Bishop takes c4 was played by Alekhine, taking the pawn back, but he thinks that knight f3 is a better way to exploit white's advantage in space. And he gives the following line, just to show you the line that Alekhine gives. E takes d4, then the queen takes, the queens get swapped, and b5, a4, b4, knight back, bishop a6, bishop e3, knight f6, and f3. And Alekhine writes this is followed by rook c1 and bishop takes c4 with a clear positional advantage according to Alekhine. But in the game Alekhine took back the pawn straight away. Bishop takes c4. Euwe took on d4 with the pawn. A bad move is queen takes d4 instead, because then there is queen b3 threatening to take on f7, which white is now attacking with 2 pieces. So then queen d7 to protect f7 and bishop g5, followed by rook d1, and this is a very strong attack for white. So Euwe took on d4 with the pawn. And we're only on move 6, and look at this move. Knight f3, what is this? It's a fantastic move, just leaving the knight on c3 en prise. Kasparov writes in his book My Great Predecessors, such an idea could only have been thought up by Alekhine, a person who, on a new level, processed and whirled around in his mind all the ideas of the masters from the past. Nice words from Kasparov, the 13th world champion. What an incredible idea. Just giving away a piece on move 6, and that in a world championship match. Euwe thought here for a long time and decided not to take the piece. What if he had taken the piece d takes c3? Well, there are of course tons of variations. It's a very complex position. Let's look here at Alekhine's chief variation, as he calls it. After d takes c3 he was planning bishop takes f7 check, and you cannot take that bishop because then your queen is unprotected. So after bishop takes f7 check you have to play king e7, and then Alekhine was planning queen b3, knight f6, e5 kicking the knight, knight to e4, and then Alekhine wanted to castle. This variation that he saw is 16 moves deep. Let's keep going. Queen b6, trying to swap the queens. That would be a great achievement for black, being a piece up. Queen c4. White's compensation is all about black's king, who is in the open. So white wants to keep the queens on, but that implies a sacrifice of a second piece, as we'll see. Black can take on b2. Bishop takes. Queen takes. Yes, white can take on e4, but then black can take on f7, and is now 2 pieces up. Knight g5 check. The variation continues. King e8. Queen c4. Bishop e7. And white gives a check. Alekhine claims that he had seen all this in his preparation. King d8. Rook a d1 check. Bishop d7. Knight e6 check. The king can only go to c8. That's the only legal move. Then white can take a piece back. Queen takes e5. Rook fe1 hitting the queen. And queen f6 is then the next move from Alekhine. Kasparov claims that queen a5 is more tenacious for black. But let's continue with Alekhine's variation. Queen f6. Then rook takes d7. And here knight takes d7 does not work because of queen d6 with a mate threat. And black will have to give his queen to avoid being checkmated. So after rook takes d7, black plays queen takes e7. And rook takes e7, the 22nd move. And this variation started on the 6th move, and Alekhine had prepared all this. And his conclusion was that this is a winning position for white. He has his material back, and black's pieces are stuck on their initial squares. And of course there are a million of other variations, but I will not go into those. So back to the game. Where were we? We were at knight f3, sacrificing that piece. But Euwe did not take it. He thought for a long time and then came up with b5. Attacking a second piece, but b5 is a very bad move. As Kasparov writes, is the worst of all possible replies. And he says that Euwe was obviously in a state of shock, since after spending a mass of time he immediately makes a losing move. And why is this a losing move? Well, it is because white can now take on b5. And Alekhine writes that Euwe must have overlooked this move. And why is that so strong? Well, you cannot take the knight back, because then there is bishop d5. And black is going to lose a rook. White has a winning position. So after knight takes b5, a move missed by Euwe, he played bishop a6 and queen b3, defending the bishop, which is handy, preventing bishop b4 check, and also attacking f7. A multi-purpose move, queen b3. Queen e7 from Euwe. And Kasparov writes, essentially the battle in this game was already over on the 8th move. White is a pawn up with a strong attack. Euwe drags on the resistance, most probably merely to ease his conscience. Queen e7 was played. Why did bishop takes b5 not work? Because of bishop takes f7 check. The king cannot go to e7 because there is a mate in 1. This is checkmate. And if the king goes to d7 instead, then there is knight takes d4 with a big advantage for white. So queen e7 was played by the world champion. Alekhine castled. And taking on b5 with the pawn does not work because bishop d5 still wins a rook. So Euwe took with the bishop. Bishop takes, and you cannot take the bishop because now the queen comes on d5 and still wins a rook. So after bishop takes b5, Euwe played knight f6. Bishop c4, knight bd7, and white took on d4 and is now that pawn up that Kasparov was talking about. Rook b8, queen c2, and queen c5. Here for a moment it looks like you can take on c6 with white, because if the queen takes, then there is a discovered check, winning the queen. King takes, queen takes c6, and white has won black's queen. But after knight takes c6, black plays rook c8, and it is black who wins a piece here. So after queen c5, Alekhine did not take on c6, he played knight f5. knight e5, and it looks like white can take on g7, but that's a trap set by Euwe, which Alekhine avoids, because knight takes g7 is a bad move. It looks good, because you cannot take the knight, because then the bishop is no longer protecting the queen, and we have bishop takes f7 check again, winning black's queen. But after knight takes g7 check, black plays king d8 instead. And after rook d1 check, the king goes to c7, and two of white's pieces are now hanging. Alekhine did not fall for this trap, and after knight e5 he played bishop f4 instead. Knight h5, and this allows a combination winning another pawn, which puts black out of his misery in this game, because bishop takes f7 check is now possible. Because after king takes, queen takes, bishop takes e5, this now has won a second pawn for white. You cannot play rook be8, because white has bishop d6, and that keeps the material advantage of two pawns. So after bishop takes e5, hitting the rook went to b5, and Alekhine played bishop d6, and now white is threatening a4, and the rook has to keep protecting the bishop, so the rook has to go to a5, but then there is b4, and that will win more material for white. So after bishop d6, Euwe played his bishop to b6, and now b4 from Alekhine, threatening to trap the rook with a4. Rook d8, and now you have to be careful, you cannot trap that rook with a4. Yes, the rook is trapped, but now black can take on f5, winning two pieces for the rook. E takes f5, and rook takes d6. Alekhine did not fall for that, and after rook d8 he played rook a d1 instead, protecting the bishop. c5 from Euwe, b takes, bishop takes, and rook d5 was the last move of the game, move 23, and this is winning more material. Here Max Euwe resigned. Why is black losing more material? Well, he's attacking the bishop with two pieces. The bishop is pinned, because otherwise the rook will fall. And if you play rook c8 to protect the bishop again, then there is bishop takes c5. And if you take with this rook, there is knight d6, check, with a fork, winning material. And if you take with the other rook, then we also see knight d6, still with a fork, winning more material for white. So Euwe resigned after rook d5, and Kasparov writes, the turning point in the match started with game 6. This is probably one of the most vivid demonstrations not only of Alekhine's unrestrained imagination, but also his psychological aggression. And this game made it 3 points all after 6 games. And game 6 must have knocked down Euwe somewhat. As you can see from this table, he lost 3 of the next 4 games. And after 25 games it was all over. Alekhine by that time had won 10 games, Euwe only 4, and Alekhine had reached the 15.5 points which he needed to regain the title. Alexander Alekhine was the champion of the world again. A very faithful supporter of the Chess to Impress channel, Brandon Ward, knows I'm from the Netherlands and said in the comments that I must be proud to have a Dutchman as one of the world champions. Yes, I am indeed, and I'm not the only one. Max Euwe is still talked about with the greatest respect in the Dutch chess community. I took this picture in one of the chess clubs in the Netherlands in Bussum, and they have a painting of the great man on the wall, and the room they play in is named after Euwe as well. Alekhine was world champion again, but what is the next event? The World Championship tournament 11 years later in 1948. What happened there? Well, I'll tell you all about that in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you will keep counting down towards the great Carlsen-Caruana match with me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will make sure to reply. If you like the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. The link to the series is here. If you like it, please spread the word. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.